Now, I recorded a video earlier in the day reacting to this exact trade, Nikola Vucevic to the Chicago Bulls. It was obviously the first major trade, the biggest trade of the deadline period if you're just looking at a player basis, the best player to get dealt. But I thought, let's just give it a bit more time. One day, what's going to be the difference between uploading it yesterday and today? Well, the difference is probably not as many people are going to be searching for it. So if you could drop a like on the video for that reason so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle, that would be cool. In the end, the Chicago Bulls made another move that I think is one of the most underrated, if probably the most underrated move of the entire period. Daniel Theis for nothing? Daniel Theis, who was it? Mo Wagner, who they got for Daniel Gafford? I don't know how it worked in the end, but in the end, they didn't give up much for someone who's a very, very solid center. I know some people said the Celtics traded him after he missed that game winner. I mean, with Boston and the way they've been acting recently, would you be surprised? Would you be surprised if the Boston Celtics said, you've missed a game winner, let's ship you off, you're bad for team morale at this point? I wouldn't be surprised, but anyways, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and he's definitely not trash. Daniel Theis, we'll talk about him in a bit, but let's be honest, the reason I'm making this video is not for Daniel Theis. It's because the Chicago Bulls are now a team that should be playoff bound. Other things can happen, there can be some circumstances, but this team has enough talent and 2 star-level players to make them a playoff-level team for the first time in quite some time. Now, just in case you happen to miss the details of the trade, it was a solid trade for both teams. The Magic get 2 first-round picks. One of them is a top 4 protected pick for this year and a 2023 first-round pick, alongside Wendell Carter Jr., who I think is going to be a solid piece for them going forward, and then Otto Porter Jr. to match the contracts. Now, I think it just makes so much sense for the Bulls because although some people think they might not be in that window to compete for a championship, and I don't expect them to compete for a championship right now, you've got a team in Chicago. This is a huge market. This is a big market that if players see that all of a sudden this team goes from a team that was 19-24 before this trade, they should have been higher than that. They should be a playoff team right now. They've lost some games that they just had no right to lose. There's just no way you should have lost some of those games that they lost, but they did. Now you bring in Vucevic. That should eliminate some of those tough losses. But yeah, all of a sudden you're a team that should be a free agent destination. That's not getting talked about enough. We talk about the LAs and the New Yorks and all of those teams. Now you've got Chicago. Zach Lavines is a player that a lot of players I could see wanting to play alongside Nikola Vucevic. That's a team that should be a playoff team in a big market. Even if you're not luring, say, a star player, it could be the difference between maybe getting one of those winning kind of role players, like a Jay Crowder type of guy that you might not have got in the past. That could be the difference, and getting 1 or 2 of those guys is a huge difference. I mean, we've seen it with Thaddeus Young this year. People kind of just looked at it as a throwaway move last year, or at least just not a huge move, but these are the kind of guys that change your team as well, alongside the Vucevic's and the Lavines and the foundations that you have now built with a good coach in Billy Donovan. So that's not getting talked about enough. Another thing that's not getting talked about is the fact Zach Lavine is only 26. He's going to be a free agent after next year. You look at the Devin Bookers, the Donovan Mitchells, the Jaylen Browns. Everyone wants to talk about, you need to keep those guys happy. You need to surround them with players so they don't want to leave. Zach Lavine is well and truly in that conversation. I think he's having a better year than any of those guys I just mentioned. That's just this year, but I'm saying in general at 26, just turned 26, he's someone you want to keep. He's someone that if you keep, you're going to be a competitive team like we've seen, and now you added Nikola Vucevic, and you're going to be more than competitive. You should be a playoff team, and you could be a team that could make some noise in the first, maybe even second round. Who really knows? We're yet to see that. We need to see them play before we can talk about doing anything like that. But getting back to Vucevic, what he brings to this team, I mean, we know what Vucevic is. He's an all-star. He's averaging 24 and 10 this year. He can play make. He shoots the 3-ball really well for a big man. He's got one of the best post-up games in the league. He's got a mid-range shot. He just does everything well for an offensive-minded center. And then defensively, although he's not a defensive anchor by any means, something the Bulls definitely struggled with this year was against the bigger bodies. Joel Embiid bodied them this season. Nikola Jokic did. I mean, these guys do it to every team, so that's nothing new. But still, Wendell Carter Jr. at 6'8", he's a small center, and he's not exactly huge to the point where he could go up against those bigger guys. You bring in Vucevic, he might not be as good defensively, but in terms of what he fills for this team, that might be more important defensively. So if you know what I mean, defensively, I think it's a similar kind of move. And then offensively, like, do I need to say anything about that? Nikola Vucevic is probably one of the better offensive players in the league, let alone Wendell Carter Jr. No offense, he's going to be a solid player, but yeah, The less said about that, the better. But there's just a few things that I want to note as well, outside of just Vucevic being Vucevic. We could talk about him all day long, but most of you people watching probably know what he is. He's an all-star level player that commanded a couple of first-round picks and a young player for a reason, because he's just that good. You've got to look at the bigger picture. You've got to look at the playoffs, which, like I mentioned, I'm expecting them to make it right now because of the talent on their roster. Look at what teams like the Denver Nuggets have been able to do in series with a pick and roll partnership between your guard and your big, who can both score at 3 levels, who are both great three-point shooters, mid-range shooters, someone who can post up and do all of these things. Look at what the Denver Nuggets were able to do. They were able to make it to the Western Conference Finals purely off offense being ran through Jamal Murray and Nikola Vucevic. I mean, Michael Porter Jr. said it himself. Those two just run the entire offense. And it's not a bad thing by any means. That doesn't mean that's all you want to do. But a pick and roll partnership between Nikola Vucevic and Zach Lavine, that's going to be just as dangerous as that partnership I just mentioned. And I'm a huge fan of the Nuggets. But when you just look at offensively and from a scoring perspective, Zach Lavine and Nikola Vucevic in a pick and roll, with their ability to stretch the floor, both of them, hit those mid-range shots and attack the rim. And more importantly, I just don't care what team you come up against. No team is just stamping that out. No team is going to be able to stop that. Whether that's enough to win them a series or win them 2 series, I don't know yet, but that's an offensive partnership that's going to make you one of the elite offenses just straight away, just purely because you've got 2 guys who can run such an effective play and are just going to give you 25 a night on efficient shooting. Now, on a similar note to what I just mentioned, Vucevic can also bring other players involved. He's a pretty good playmaker. Billy Donovan likes to run some plays from the elbow for his bigs. He's done it with Steven Adams and Wendell Carter Jr. But now what's he going to do? He's now got Nikola Vucevic. Little bit of an upgrade offensively. Little bit of an upgrade. So now he's got the potential to do that. And I'm going to come back to the Nuggets again because I think back to an earlier game in the season, not too long ago, where the Denver Nuggets played against the Chicago Bulls. Bulls fans would remember this. And Nikola Vucevic was torching you, unfortunately. Again, nothing to be ashamed of. He does it to the best. But Nikola Vucevic was torching you guys. And I remember Jamal Murray saying in-game to Zach Lavine, you're going to need to double team this guy. And Zach Lavine's response was, we can't double team him because we're going to leave someone like you open, which is not a good thing to do. We've seen that happen so many times. Think about Nikola Vucevic now. Throw it into him in the post, and all of a sudden, if you want to double team him, then you're leaving open maybe Zach Lavine, one of the best three-point shooters in the league, Lauri Markkanen, if he's on the floor at the same time, a 40% three-point shooter, a Deadeye, Patrick Williams, Kobe White, good three-point shooters as well. Or you can let him go 1v1 and just let him torch you. Either way, it seems like a move that is going to really help the Bulls offense, just take it to another level. This is a team that with this kind of move, you expect them to be an elite offensive team. They've got the talent, they've got the firepower now. And just going back to the trade perspective briefly, when you look at the picks, you look at what they're going to convey out to be. Mid-teen picks, maybe in the 20s if the Bulls do surpass expectations in the playoffs. Is that really changing your franchise? Like I mentioned, with free agency, you could probably pick up a guy that's going to be just as good as someone in the teens. I mean, by chance, you can pick up a star in the draft, but you could probably get someone in free agency if you're a big market, if you're a contending team, that's going to be just as good as if you had 2 first-round picks. I just don't think it's a huge thing for the Bulls to give up to get someone who's going to make a big difference for this team. And it's not like the Bulls just have Vucevic and Zach Lavine and need these picks. No, they've already got solid young players around them that are further on in their development. I talked about Lauri Markkanen. It's interesting because Lauri Markkanen, does he fit with Nikola Vucevic? Obviously, we know he's not the best defensive player. Vucevic, although I said he could be solid defensively for this team, he's not a great defender. He's not someone that if you pair with another bad defender or another average defender, would really be ideal. And Zach Lavine, not a great defender either. All of a sudden, you've got quite a few average defenders on the floor at the same time, and some question marks start to arise. But that's a job for Billy Donovan, unfortunately. For me, all I can say is Lauri Markkanen, he's a talented player that if you can find a role for him, giving you 18 to 20 points a night, an efficient scorer, if you can somehow fit in Lauri Markkanen and make sure your defense isn't terrible at the same time, by all means do it. By all means, that's just going to elevate their offense again. You've got Patrick Williams already, who's already a pretty good defender. He'll be in the starting lineup. Kobe White, I don't know what they're going to do with him, but he should be solid as well. And then Thaddeus Young. The Bulls just have a really solid team right now. And someone that I haven't even mentioned that's now going to be in the mix, Daniel Theis. Daniel Theis. Yeah, I know that's a name that sometimes gets met with mixed responses, but he's a good player. He's a player that was playing 25 minutes a game for the last 2 seasons for a Boston team that has generally been pretty good. Last year, obviously, they were very good. This year, well, that's been a different story. Obviously, they traded him because he missed that game winner. But he's generally a good player. He can shoot the 3-ball. He can protect the rim pretty well. He's a good, solid defender. He does a lot of things well. He's also played with other bigs like Robert Williams, Tristan Thompson. So you could have that in the bag as well if you want to throw him in alongside Vucevic. I don't know if they're going to do that, but it's potential. It's just versatility. And it's someone who you've gone from having Wendell Carter Jr. and Daniel Gafford. I mean, Luke Cornett has played minutes for this Bulls team this year. Luke Cornett. To now having Nikola Vucevic and Daniel Theis, which is probably the best center rotation in the league. If you just look at it as a 2-man rotation, that's a huge upgrade. The Bulls have managed to pull off a huge upgrade, and the Daniel Theis move, in my opinion, isn't getting talked about enough. That is just a steal. It's daylight robbery. I'm pretty sure the Celtics only gave up on him because of monetary reasons. So the Bulls have been the beneficiary of them being cheap, and Bulls fans should be ecstatic with getting in Daniel Theis. Just looking at the Bulls going forward, the Bulls right now, this is a team that I don't want to face in the playoffs if I'm a team, because I already thought they could be a little bit of a wild card threat in the playoffs if they made it this year, just purely because of Zach Lavine. He's just that good offensively, and he can just get that hot that he could beat any team on any given night. We've already seen that this year. But now you add in someone else in Nikola Vucevic and what's going to be an unstoppable pick and roll partnership, which I can't emphasize enough. This is a team that you definitely don't want to face in the playoffs. Do I think they're going to win a championship this year? No, I don't think that's going to happen. But they're a team that could cause an upset in the first round just because of how offensively talented they are. And then going forward, like I mentioned, this is a team that if they're in the playoff picture, Zach Lavine's still young, Patrick Williams, Kobe White, Larry Markkinen if he re-signs, obviously Nikola Vucevic, Thaddeus Young, free agents are going to be tempted to come to Chicago and be like, I could be the guy that could push this team over the edge and bring some success to a huge market team. Good trade for both teams involved, but I think the underlying factors of what comes from Chicago bringing in Nikola Vucevic, outside of him just being a really good player, but what could possibly be a knock-on effect with them getting in some nice free agents, that could be huge. And signing Zach Lavine again, those are things that shouldn't be underestimated. And those are things that are probably a lot more likely to happen now that they've got an all-star center to go along with an all-star guard. If you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Anyways, have a good day. Catch you next time. Bye.